Well, thank you, and good afternoon. It's always a little bit dangerous to be the last speaker before lunch. I'll try to keep my remarks to less than 2 hours, and I'm just kidding. But I very much appreciate the invitation to speak here today and to share some perspectives on what we think is a critical piece of this puzzle, and namely the actual food and flavor on our plates, and the potential for chefs to help shape and nudge our food choices in the right direction. I also want to talk briefly about our Menus of Change initiative that we've launched with the Harvard School of Public Health. And although this initiative is designed within the context of the $680 billion U.S. Food service sector, I think there's an abundance of synergies here between our work and the work of the EAT Forum. Now, just to, before I get into that, just a couple of quick words about our institution, Culinary Institute of America. That's our main campus in New York, our California campus. We're a nonprofit college. We have 46,000 alumni that work throughout the United States and throughout the world, and they work at all different levels of food service, from the top chefs, the chefs that are on television that are driving a lot of the food trends, to the military, public schools. So we have a good sense of what's going on in the food service sector across the board. One of the things that is the most interesting, I think, about chefs today, the world of chefs, is that chefs have come out from the kitchen and are increasingly involved in food issues and leadership around ethics and health and sustainability. A couple of years ago, we articulated some of our thought leadership platforms that we're working on for the future. Passion for knowledge, excellence, innovation, of course, goes to the core of what we do. Health and wellness, world cuisines, sustainability, and food ethics. These are the things that drive our leadership work within the industry. So now a little bit about the Menus of Change initiative. We have a very robust partnership with the Harvard School of Public Health. Terrific team there, led by Dr. Willett, who you heard from yesterday. This is a program that we've developed, and now in its second year, to really look at the future of food. One of the things we're hearing from a lot of chefs in the United States is that there's so many issues that are coming up, whether it's trans fats or sodium or various environmental issues, and there wasn't really a roadmap to look at. Folks in food service might say, I'm not sure this is what my customer wants. I'm not sure this is what I want to do as an operator, but I want to know what the roadmap is that integrates all of this so that I can potentially make some progress towards that. And we looked at that within not just the context of, as I'll go to the next slide here. So this is kind of how we've conceptualized this. The little Venn diagram, first asking what is the most optimal in terms of nutrition, environmental sustainability, social responsibility and ethics, and then that very important piece to us is the notion of deliciousness or pleasure in food, which sometimes I think we're all a little bit uncomfortable talking about, is incredibly important to the consumer. Then we have to say, what's the vision of how all that comes together? What's the overlap with business models? Because you could imagine you could have the most incredibly healthy, delicious, sustainable food, but you run a restaurant, you couldn't do commercial food service that way, and that gives us the guidance that we're looking for. We have a scientific and technical advisory council that Dr. Willett heads with some of the top researchers in the United States. We have a Sustainable Business Leadership Council, so we have real world input from various business leaders and what they're doing on sustainability. And we publish an annual report on the future of food. So I would encourage you all, I'll show you the website here in a second, to check that out, download that. We're just finishing the second annual report. There's the website, menusofchange.org. And this is, I'm not going to go into that much detail here, but we've created a model for change so that if you have a food service operator that says, I want to move in a more sustainable, healthy direction, how do I do that? How do I think about this? And we've sort of mapped that out from integrating the science, bringing in consumer perspective, talking about cost issues, evaluating risk and opportunity, and then coming to a final conclusion of some healthful, or of some successful change. What I want to talk a little bit about is we've developed 24 principles of healthy, sustainable menus. And so that for a leader, whether you're running a global chain restaurant or whether you're running a neighborhood restaurant or whatever the concept, that this is your roadmap. And I encourage you to all check this out, and hopefully it'll be of use to you. But I want to talk about one principle in particular that I think is especially important. And that is, and others have mentioned this and touched on this certainly during the forum, and I'm just going to read this to you. Globally inspired, largely plant-based cooking. Scientific research suggests that the most effective way to help diners make healthy, sustainable food choices is to shift our collective diets to mostly plant-based foods. In fact, no other decision in the professional kitchen or in the boardroom of food service companies can compare in terms of the benefits of advancing global environmental sustainability. Now, here's where the concept of culinary strategy comes in. From the well-researched Mediterranean diet to the cuisines of Asia and Latin America, traditional food cultures offer a myriad of flavor strategies to support innovation around healthy, delicious, even craveable cooking that rebalances ratios between foods from animal and plant sources. Two key questions. How do we increase the appeal and use of produce, whole grains, nuts, legumes, and other plant-based proteins? And how do we leverage smaller, more infrequent amounts of meat to greater effect? I don't think it's enough for us to say, you all should be eating more plant-based foods, you should be eating more vegetables, less meat. I think the culinary community and all of us have to step up and figure out how to make plant-based foods as delicious and craveable as animal-based foods, as the most indulgent food you would get from restaurants. And I think it's entirely possible, and I just think we haven't focused on that enough. The notion of culinary strategy is something that I'd love to have you all think about. I'm not going to go into a great deal of depth on this, but it starts from farming with flavor so that the raw materials we have to work with are less about cosmetic performance, cosmetic perfection, and are more about flavor. I think we can do a lot more there, whether it's sourcing local seasonal product, culinary techniques, aromatics. We'll talk about this in a minute, the concept of flips and blends. Elevate plant protein, how do we do that? Healthy oils, we need to distinguish between saturated fats and unsaturated fats and the value that unsaturated fats can help us with building flavor. But I'll just take one of these, which is herbs and spices and aromatics, and the extent that they can help to amplify the impact of meat as a condiment and plant-based flavors and really transform vegetables. Here's just one example, and this is kind of the way we're thinking about these things. All over the world, you have examples of traditional cuisines that are roasting vegetables and mixing those with some sort of a spice blend, spice paste, so forth. So whether it's cauliflower roasted with Indian spices, roasted carrots with North African spices, wood roasted eggplant with Turkish spices, so forth, I can come up with a long, long list. And these are vegetable dishes that are absolutely craveable. You don't feel like you're being deprived when you eat food like this. One of the things that we find in the United States very much is that we tend to, chefs and restaurateurs tend to divide their public into two parts. You've got sort of the regular customers, and then you've got the vegetarians and the special need customers and so forth. And we typically go from a large portion of protein to the vegetarian option. And what we've said is what we need to do is to fill in the gap between those options. And so we talk about a notion of a flip or a blend. So if you take here, for instance, you have a big steak with a few mushrooms on top, or you have a portobello mushroom burger. And that's typically all we do. We can do better than that. So if you look at the concept, for instance, of Asian stir fries, you have a small amount of meat flavoring a lot of vegetables. We've taken that big piece of meat off the center of the plate. Or here you have on the right, a 50-50 meat mushroom blend for a meatball. We actually did some fabulous work with the University of California, Davis. They have a top sensory science team. And we developed a recipe that uses literally 50% mushrooms on the meatball. And the consumer preferences were higher than for the all-meat meatball. Now, these are not concepts that we have to invent. I think there's a lot of inspiration that we can gather from traditional cuisines all over the world. So we like to say that necessity was the mother of invention in traditional kitchens. This guy has to sell all these greens before the end of the day, or he's going to be in trouble. Most traditional cooks around the world, that's what they started with, is a mountain of vegetables, a mountain of greens, a mountain of plant-based foods. And then how do you cook these things to make my family happy? And typically it's been using small amounts of animal-based food strategically to flavor the rest of the plate. And you get things like this, which is an Asian noodle bowl with a very small amount of meat, maybe 1 or 2 ounces of meat. We have to look, or we have an opportunity to look around the world at the ways in which traditional cultures have elevated plant-based foods, from beans, chickpeas, lentils, to nuts, almonds, hazelnuts, and so forth, soy foods such as tofu. Absolutely delicious foods that we can draw from around the world. We've done a lot of work showcasing these world cuisines. There's a lot that you can find in the Mediterranean, but many other parts of the world. Here's a delicious, it could either be a hummus or a fava from Greece. Lots of wonderful ideas. I think that, you know, where we net out on this is that if you think about 75% of chronic diseases, I think scientists are saying, are a function of diet and lifestyle and associated with looming, crippling global healthcare costs, as we've heard here. The planet cannot support an additional 2 to 3 billion people pursuing the Western animal-based, animal protein-centric diet, let alone current food choices. I was at a conference at UC Davis a couple years ago. They had all of the presidents of all the top food, agriculture and food science universities in China presenting on all they were doing to drive up animal agriculture production in China, very proudly. And the chancellor of the university actually said at the end of the conference, "Are you sure you really want to do this?" So, I mean, you look at where we are now, and the plans that are on the board for animal agriculture around the world are just absolutely astonishing. So that has to stop. And yet we know, and this is the critical point, and this is the point that I would encourage you to think about, we know that people won't eat healthy food they don't like. Taste trumps nutrition and environmental imperatives every time. Some number of people will change their diet because it's the right thing to do. More people will change their diet if what you're asking them to move to is delicious. And that is as I said here in the last point, we need a new global research focus around the intersection of deliciousness and healthy, sustainable, plant-based food choices. And this is the really critical issue. I think too often in the United States and around the world, the public health community has gotten to a point of saying, you know, we've done our work, we've finished the guidelines, we've done the research, now we're going to hand it off to the chefs who are the creative ones, and you guys are going to figure this out. You know, you're going to come up with some great, and I think that's wrong. I think the public health community has to be part of figuring out what it's going to take to make these newer plant-based food choices delicious, because otherwise, and we see this now, the research is running way ahead of the public's ability to adopt these. So I'd like us to think about having broad partnerships with academic research and public health communities to help uncover the art and science of potentially transformative culinary strategies and food experiences. The last thing I want to mention is that we're very excited about, I was so happy that Michael Backer was here with Google. We have a very exciting new partnership with Google to test some of these strategies. It's a new CIA Google Culinary Innovation World Flavors Lab that we're designing now and building in 2015 that'll be at the Google headquarters in Mountain View to conduct evidence-based culinary research to translate the menus of change principles, all the same things we're talking about here, into volume food service settings at Google. And the great thing about Google, they don't want just this for themselves. They really want this to be a testing ground for the broader global food service market and beyond. Vegetables, plant-based menus are at the absolute top of the agenda. So before I wrap up, I just want to make a couple of comments about the food here at the forum. Hopefully you've enjoyed the food. I think it's been most delicious. These are a few images of that, but it was fun to work with the chef a little bit. Terrific group of chefs here at the hotel to think about, how do we make, again, these largely plant-based flavors much more appealing. What I often find is that chefs are, they're by nature creative creatures, and so if you give them a task and you say, this is what I want you to work towards, they'll rise to the challenge, and I think they did a great job with that. So a few images of what we've tasted so far. We have a delicious menu coming up for lunch today. Enjoy lunch, and we'll see you out there. Thank you very much.